Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fun and Games Podcast. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I'm Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
And continuing on a little bit from what we talked about last episode, there is a grand, I suppose, culture in gaming in terms of popular opinion. Sometimes you don't even need to play a game to know whether it's, objectively good or bad or what the idea of it all is. But can we always trust that?
Yeah, I find that, like any media review, assuming that a reviewer knows best is hard. A good example of an internet reviewer who does video games that I enjoy his reviews but rarely agree with him is Yahtzee, who does Zero Punctuation. If you're not familiar, Yahtzee is a Australian YouTuber who puts out these videos called Zero Punctuation, which are about 5 minutes, and he kind of bashes on games or gloriously praises games in a comical way. And for the most part, I rarely agreed with his opinions because he's very critical. That's kind of the point. But that said, I still enjoyed his reviews because he was funny. But I took what he thought about games with a grain of salt. But then there are other reviewers like Some Call Me Johnny and The Completionist, who are YouTubers who do Let's Plays and full-length game reviews, who I tend to trust their opinion a lot more, and sometimes have steered me wrong, not to any fault of their own, but just because I simply didn't line up in those rare instances. So you kind of have to be careful when dealing with gaming, I guess like any medium, and rely on your taste as much as, you're relying on the word of others.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, and you can try, and certainly because there's enough reviewers out there in the world and enough folks that are putting forth their opinion on games, you can also start to curate an idea of, well, like you just said, you tend to not agree with Yahtzee's opinions on a game. So you can be like, all right, well, let me be the judge of that. And some folks like Gerard, you can look and go, all right, well, they like it. That means there's a good chance I will too, whether they followed similar genre or franchise lines or like or dislike similar things about games that you do. But even then, it's not perfect. We've all had that recommendation from a friend that isn't they weren't right at all. And these are people that know us. So it's kind of a funny thing where, yes, we have this business of game reviewing, and yes, we got to support it. It's sort of the machine right now, but it's a very individualistic thing. Games are games, and they're for us to figure out for ourselves whether or not they're for us. Whether popular opinion says they're terrible and we enjoy them, or vice versa.
For sure. I mean, I think that my earliest experience with this kind of media separation from agreeing with reviewers or not is when I first started my now on hiatus music review podcast, Crash Chords. I'm someone who's grown up listening to a lot of different varieties of music and liking different bands for better or worse. I mean, I can openly admit that I was at one time a Nickelback fan, though I did learn better. But this idea that there's pop music that I think is really great or fun to dance to that on a objective level, looking at its quality, may not be amazing or technical, but I still really enjoy it. And I started to interact with music a little differently because of that. But at the end of the day, I trusted what I liked for what I wanted to enjoy. And I've had a similar experience with gaming. My most recent example is the newest Sonic game, 3D Sonic game, Sonic Forces, which came out at the same time as Sonic Mania. I only recently bought, and I had held off for a while because I'd heard good things from some friends of mine whose opinions on games can be questionable. But game reviewers who are notorious for reviewing Sonic games and being as passionate about Sonic as I am, Some Call Me Johnny is the one that comes to the top of my head, said that it was mediocre. He said that it wasn't awful, but it was average to less than average, and that he didn't really like it. And so I was like, oh, well, that's a shame. It looked fun. But I ended up buying it anyway recently, and I found that I really loved it. The story is not overly complex, nor does it make a ton of sense, but it's a Sonic game, so I care very little about that. Most of the stages were fun, sometimes a little simplistic, but, and then the create an avatar part was really cool. Like, making your own Sonic character, I didn't think would be something I'd care about. even though I like character creation tools. But that said, I had a blast making a character, giving him cool costumes to wear, and his power set with the Wispin, which is a weapon that uses the wisps from the series, was actually a really cool tool. So I think that while, yes, on the pantheon of Sonic games, this may not be great, but it's definitely by far not the worst Sonic game I've ever played. That's still reserved for Sonic Unleashed. So I was just a bit bummed that I trusted this reviewer and then ended up feeling differently. Now, again, this is not Some May Call Me Johnny's fault.
Absolutely.
He's doing how he felt about the game. He's talking about, he's always very closely emotionally tied to Sonic games, and so he's talking about his experience. But it made me realize, you can't always trust reviewers, even the reviewers you like, because sometimes your opinion will differ.
And we run into an issue, too, where there are a lot of people putting out their reviews, putting out their opinions. And one of the ways that you can gain attention is by having very strong opinions. You don't want to have middle-of-the-road opinions. One of the reasons why Zero Punctuation exploded like it did so many years ago is because of the extremity of his opinion and his execution. And I definitely enjoy watching his videos, even if I don't agree with the review, for its entertainment value.
Right.
His very colorful language, fantastic editing, and very quick humor. I enjoy that a great deal. I mean, even going further back, looking at Cinemassacre, the Angry Video Game Nerd, the very concept of it is there, all faders set to full or nothing, one way or the other. And there are several people, certainly on, I don't want to say, well, on the more independent level, that probably feel in order to get your review out there, get your opinion heard, build your following, you need these very extreme opinions. And so it kind of fries out the nerve endings and desensitizes you to the nuance of review. I feel that pendulum starting to swing back a little bit. I'm seeing review sites start to leave behind review scores when they can, and instead do more bullet point ideas and try to counterpoint as best they can. But even then, we still are, I think it's going to be a number of years before we stop smarting from the idea of you have to be very extreme in your devotion or revulsion. And yeah, it causes a lot of us to be left out in the cold, either missing out on games we probably could have really liked or spending our money uselessly.
Right. I mean, at the end of the day, it's up to you to decide what you want to play, the freedom of choice and all of that. But it's easy to get bogged down. There's so many video games on the market, and it's just impossible to have the time to play all of them unless you're lucky enough to have no job or work from home.
Or playing video games is your job.
Right. But I'm sure even like Gerard sometimes feels like he wishes he had another job because he's playing all of these games to complete them. And I have no idea how he finds the time to play games just for the fun of playing games. But all of that said, I think it also feeds into why I personally never wanted to do a game review podcast. As someone who did a music review podcast, though on that show, we always stated that the track-by-track breakdown of those albums was more important to us. The discussion part was more important to us than the rating we gave at the end. And that's why the rating was at the end, and we posted the ratings on the website. Because if you're just looking for a quick number count, you can just check it out. But the point of that show was the discourse. But even still, with video games, I wanted to talk about gaming as an art more with you, because I feel like with video games, especially because it's such a longer experience, it could be pretty pigeonholed. With an album, even if it's an hour and a half long album, you can get through that pretty quickly and move on to the next thing. But most games on average now are at least 10 hours or more. In fact, 10 hours is the really low side. And so I feel like I don't want to review a game because then I'd have to play the majority of that game every week or every other week, and I would burn out so easily on something I love. Whereas with music, it was okay because we weren't always picking artists that we knew of or had heard of, or artists that we were interested in that we never talked about before, and so it was a little more freeing. Whereas with video games, as we were talking last week with franchise fatigue, there's so many games that I feel like it would be impossible to give a true expression of how I feel about that game in an honest way with the amount of time I would be able to give myself.
Yeah, and I mean, even with music, I find that I can't give an honest review of an album after one listen. I need, and it's not like sit there for an afternoon and listen to it 4 times in a row. I mean, over the course of a week, maybe even 2 weeks, listen to it, go back to it, maybe re-listen a couple tracks that stuck out to me, listen to it again, kind of let it breathe, let it organically grow in my mind. What tracks stick with me? How do I feel about it? Do I want to come back to it? Is it worth giving it another try? You can't give that same kind of growth, devotion, blooming if you are, reviewing 7 games a week, 10 games a week, even 2 games a week. If there's so many hours you need to put into it, this is like, we're not the first ones to talk about this, certainly, but this is the first time we're talking about it. And that idea of even like video game reviewers themselves saying we can't give these games enough time to give you a proper review, to give you a proper idea. Even when companies will send review copies of a week, 2 weeks early so that reviews can be ready first day and they've had time to put into it, it's still, you're now playing it with the idea of, all right, I need to get to the end. I need to do this. You're not going to find out like, oh man, I really liked this aspect of the game. Or while I was playing, I kept going back to this area, or I found myself delighted by this all the time. You're just like, I need to get to the end. What's good? What's bad? What's that? Like, it's a very different sort of orientation about your gameplay. And even as somebody who is trying to beat 52 games this year, and I'm more or less on track, I find having that sort of get to the end drive really robs you of a lot of enjoyment and opportunities for enjoyment. And that's what we're all putting ourselves through as we put our faith entirely in the reviews we see online and in, the few magazines that are still out.
Yeah, and I mean, we've talked about this a little bit before on the show. I feel like also when identifying a reviewer that you trust, you have to keep in mind that, major publications that are trying to review so many games, they might have a person who does first-person shooters and a person who usually does platformers, but they may have to do other genres on other days just to get stuff out.
Yeah.
Famously, there was a Cuphead review where the demo video of the person playing it wasn't playing the tutorial very well and was screwing up a lot. And like that meant that his opinion about the game didn't matter because he wasn't good at it. But again, if it's, first of all, game reviews are an opinion piece. At the end of the day, besides citing specific graphical, sound, or gameplay issues that functionally make the game broken, like every review of Sonic Boom,
Right.
it becomes an opinion piece. Like something like Cuphead is so refined and so well made from a graphics standpoint, from a sound design standpoint, that if your complaint is that the controls suck and you don't play the game well, clearly that someone who's good at those kinds of bullet hell games shouldn't take your opinion seriously. To fight back about it doesn't make sense because you can clearly tell the player is not very good. And if his main complaint is the controls, then well, I can disregard that because I know I could do better. It's something that we have to take with a grain of salt after a certain level because, again, if you really like that certain genre, like for me, I've said many times on the show, I'm not a fan of Call of Duty. I'm just not. I've played some of the games with friends. It's fun, but I'm not a fan of that series. So if a rave review comes out for the new Call of Duty Black Ops that's coming out, I think next year or later this year, I'm not going to care because I'm not going to play it still because I'm not really interested unless I play it at someone's house and like I really fall in love with it after trying it. I'm never going to buy a game like that. I'm just not going to have any interest in it. But a la first-person shooters, I had no interest in the first Borderlands at first, and then I played it at a friend's house, and I was like, oh, this game is a lot of fun. Now I will go buy it because I like it. Stuff like that, a review couldn't penetrate because even reading reviews on Borderlands after the fact, like they were all praising that game, but I wouldn't have cared if I wasn't into first-person shooters at the time. And so what you're into can really color what you want regardless of what a game reviewer says.
And sometimes it's you just need the right words. You just need the right like through line to understanding the game. I kind of had a similar experience with Borderlands. It didn't interest me when it first came out. This has been documented earlier in earlier episodes. I don't care for the Halo franchise. A lot of first-person shooters, like they really gotta have something to reel me in here. And so I didn't care much about it. It's like, oh, it's little neato, whatever, post-apocalyptic, whatever. And then A friend sat me down and went, Geoff, this is Diablo with guns. First person Diablo, you have a class, you find really wacky, just randomized loot, and it's insanity. Like, this isn't the Epic of Good and Evil, but like that core gameplay of just find the weird stuff. And it was. And when I came at it with that idea, I was like, it clicked. And then, yes, I absolutely went out and got a copy and have put a good deal of hours into the game. So sometimes you don't need a long essay. Sometimes you don't need, you just need somebody to the right frame of reference. And there again, you can't expect anybody to be able to give everybody the proper frame of reference to reckon with a game to see whether or not that's what they're going to enjoy. I mean, I'm just standing here like pulling this apart, like the absolute postmodern. Like, can we trust anything? Are there facts? I don't even know. What are facts? What are numbers? But this is why we have this podcast, and this is why I love talking about the culture of gaming, because of the experiences we bring to the table. An example of something that I've seen bad reviews, but I enjoy, are typically earlier roguelike games.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, nowadays, roguelike is like a freaking buzzword. It's like sprinkled on top of every indie darling that comes out these days. Like, it just is. But there was one in particular that I found for the DS a while back, Azuna, Legend of the Unemployed Ninja. And I might be butchering the title a little bit. I know where it is on my shelf. And it's one of these it's that tile-based, everything stays where it is, like a true roguelike game. It's not a roguelike because it's randomly generated. It is. But it's that kind of thing of you move, the enemies move. You attack, the enemies do something. And you navigate in that sense. If you die in the dungeon, you lose everything you picked up in the dungeon that run and are back in town. So you got to start that again. So it's a lot of like resource management, careful planning, bit of this and that. And going back, I read some of the reviews. I get the impression that a lot of reviewers were trying to look at this as more of a, Tenchu or Ninja Gaiden or something like that, and being disappointed. And not a lot of games before that were super popular in that genre. The only other game I remember playing like that before was Azure Dreams for the PS1, which I also love. So the reviews didn't quite put through that this was an Azure Dreams-like game. It seemed okay, and I then found it cheap somewhere, picked it up, and I was like, oh man, this is fantastic. I love this. Why didn't somebody tell me?
Yeah. Well, and that was to the no fault of the reviewer also, because there wasn't really the articulate language to describe that game in a way, because it was an early adopter to that genre.
Right.
And that can happen too. I mean, for me, also, I've had game reviews, like talking about Sonic Forces before and liking it when it got relatively mediocre reviews. I had an opposite effect when I bought Bayonetta recently as well on the Switch. So I saw the ad for the third one coming out on the Switch. I've seen that they've had a 2-pack for Bayonetta 1 and 2 on the Switch, and I'd been wanting to play them because I grew up playing Devil May Cry and a lot of other hack and slash games. But what I didn't realize about Bayonetta, and the reviews don't really convey that much, is that it's a skill-based game in the sense that you're rated on every battle, and dodging is really important, and it's not just a beat 'em up, which is fine. But, a lot of the reviews mostly talked about the controls and the aesthetic and the sound design and the graphics, which were all great, and the Bizarro story. But when I bought it, I ended up not really liking it because it's relying on twitch reflexes that I'm not that great at. And so I butchered my way through a chunk of the story, still enjoying the story. But then I got to this one area where I just couldn't kill these bad guys and get out. And so I stopped playing it. And again, that's no fault of the game. And maybe I'll go back and put it on an easier difficulty so I can see the rest of the story. Because again, I really enjoyed the aesthetic of the game. But I just didn't love the gameplay because I was looking for something more like Hyrule Warriors where I could just pummel my way through stuff. And instead I got something that was more like the old Devil May Cry, which is hard as hell.
Yeah, a very crafted skill-based experience. And I'm one who really does enjoy Bayonetta. I like Twitch stuff. And let's move this a little further as well in terms of not just the reviewers, but sort of I want to call it like the cloud save of video game culture, where you don't have to play a game, you just know how it is because of what everybody says. We mentioned Superman 64 when we talked about the N64 classic idea. Matt, have you ever actually played Superman 64?
I have not.
Nor have I. And yet somehow we know how terrible the game is.
Sure.
Because everybody talks about it that way. And it probably is terrible. If I were able to find it for cheap or play it one day, I owe it to myself to do that. And I try to not spend too much money on buying bad games, but I definitely will give mediocre games a try because if I can find them for cheap or anything like that. Because again, we know how it is, and that colors how we go about finding games and playing games. And so a lot of times the culture of very extreme opinions can really do us a disservice. Like, well, one of my perennial favorites, the Final Fantasy series. Everyone knows how good or how bad every entry in the series is. We've talked about it. Everybody's talked about it to death. So you know that Final Fantasy VIII is a terrible game.
Correct.
I disagree.
You're allowed to be wrong.
But it's a game that well, it is a game that is flawed in some ways, but
yes,
every Final Fantasy is flawed. And even like the sacred cows of the franchise, whether that's 6, whether that's 7, whether that's 10, they're all flawed. And it's just a matter of what succeeds, what doesn't, what do you like, what do you not like. And Final Fantasy VIII did something that, you know what, is actually very difficult. It differentiated itself beautifully from 7. And Final Fantasy has always been a series that tries new and strange ideas, which then set the bar and set precedents. Like, it's very easy if you play Final Fantasy VII for the first time nowadays to be like, why is this so revolutionary? It did storyline ideas and things that really weren't popular at the time, but then kind of became the norm. And Final Fantasy VIII went, well, we're not doing that, we're not doing that, we're not doing that. It's a reactionary game. And it did a lot of interesting things. And fight me on the idea that Triple Triad is not amazing. The card game in Final Fantasy VIII will suck you in. It will frustrate you. It will delight you. Oh my God, what a collection side quest. And I like the story for what it is. Look at other stories of games at the time. This is not like, oh my God, it's a terrible, boring ass story. Well, look at everything else going on at the time. This isn't, there's an acceptable range here. I enjoy the characters, and I've played through it a number of times. It's a challenging game. It's an unexpected game. If you are using the draw system to draw spells from your enemies and doing exclusively that is the least efficient way to go about leveling and raising the stats of your characters. It does have a steep learning curve. And there again, that's something difficult to bring forth if you're going about it to play it for a review. You miss out on all of the nuances that you find in repeated playthroughs and time away to bloom and grow and return to the game. Final Fantasy VIII, I used to have a more negative opinion on it. And I realized some of it was because I was burned a little on my first playthrough. And I realized that some of it was the fact that everybody knows that Final Fantasy VIII is a terrible game. And you're allowed to continue to keep thinking that and continue to believe that and allow that to be correct for you. It's not correct for me.
Well, I think also, at the end of the day, it comes down to what you can tolerate that other people can't. I mean, like for me, the reason I hate 8 is not the story. I think the story is actually okay. Though Squall is much better in everything he's been in after 8.
Agreed.
Like Kingdom Hearts and all that. But the story was okay. I hated the card game and I hated the draw system. Now, I get that if you like the card game, it will suck you in. But I just didn't. I didn't want to play a mini game. Coming off of 7, I just wanted, to play the game. And also the draw system made it really hard to be a Magic user or focus on Magic. And so for me, that was game breaking. But again, for you, it's not, because there are other things you find in it that you like. And that's absolutely the case with a ton of games. Even some of the games that I love that are my favorites, or my favorite franchises, I've hated an entry because it just diverged from the path. I love the Mega Man series, and Mega Man 1 is notoriously one of the hardest games ever, especially for the Nintendo generation. But as the games came out more, as they released more games, they made them a little simpler so people could progress through them. When they released Mega Man, I think it was 9 and 10 for the Xbox Live, they went back to the game-breaking difficulty, and that's not what I came to Mega Man for, because I started with 2. And so I struggled and ended up not liking those games. Now, if I go back to them, I might be able to get further in them, who knows? But it made me dislike a franchise, and there was nothing wrong with that game other than the difficulty, because the sound design was on point, the graphics were great. It had everything I wanted from a Mega Man game, except that I couldn't get very far in it, and so for me that wasn't fun. And that has nothing to do with the quality of game. That has everything to do with my skill as a gamer. And yes, you could say that maybe I'm not a good enough gamer if I couldn't get through that. But the reality is gaming has such a wide spectrum now that the difficulty isn't, and the progress, being able to beat the game, isn't always the goal. Sometimes the goal is experiencing the game, and I think that's just as important.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I haven't played Mega Man 9 or 10, so I can't necessarily put my opinion forth on that. I completely missed the boat there. I'm going to get the Legacy Collection for the Switch, and I'll have my chance to play it then, because I also love Mega Man games. And I do love all of them. 1 is a bit of a chore. 2 is fantastic. I even really like 8. And a lot of people don't like Mega Man 8. It's got some window dressing flaws, and I find those hilariously charming, and anyone who's played Mega Man 8 knows exactly what I'm talking about. But at its core, it's a very fun game. And so, no, you're right. The barrier to progress can sometimes be a great turnoff, like you were saying in Bayonetta. And
you can't review for that either.
No, you can't.
Because again, when you're reviewing a game, it's not about its difficulty, because everything has an easy mode. But of course, any gamer, for the most part, most gamers will start on normal instead of starting on easy. I know some who prefer to start on easy mode because they just want to see the game, and that's totally fine. But, I think that that's something that, how could I expect that? And of course, I got far enough into Bayonetta that now starting over on easy, it's do I really want to? I've gotten this far, I'd have to start the game over. Unless you can change the difficulty through the progress, I don't remember. But either way, it's if you're playing a game that doesn't allow you to change the difficulty at any time, do you start over, or do you continue to push through? How far are you in the game? Things like that. Also, something with modern game review is, now that we have so many HD re-releases and updated ports, like Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze for the Wii and Hyrule Warriors for the Wii, can you rate a game badly? So a lot of people will complain about a franchise being samey, and we talked about that last week.
Yeah.
But can you say that Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze is fairly the same as the original? Because that's kind of the point. They added funky mode, and they streamlined some certain things and made it more accessible, but the core, it's still the same game. So can you give it a lower rating because it didn't bring that much new to the table? I mean, I guess if you played the original, but for me, I never played the original, so buying the new one on the Switch was phenomenal, and I loved it. Whereas a lot of people are complaining, oh, it's not that different. That's kind of an opinion, because if you haven't played it the first time around, that kind of is an irrelevant fact.
And sometimes you really just want more of something really good.
Right.
And no, and it's true. That's not always the case. The Legend of Zelda series has had a lot of infamous criticisms levied at it, as far as not much progress being made. But yet again, just show me a mainline Legend of Zelda game that hasn't gotten glowing reviews and little gold stars next to it and everything else. But we can still then sit there and play through something like, Skyward Sword, and be like, oh, this is exciting, this is interesting, that's a new thing. And then the longer you sit in it, the more it's just oh, all right. And you just play your way through it it's a Zelda game, is what we got. And I guess it's really refined, cool. I guess. Ugh.
Yeah, and again, I'm a fan of Zelda, so most of the
Me
games in the
too.
main series have not disappointed. But games like Skyward Sword and Twilight Princess were very polarizing because they were either too different or not different enough. Same with the Mario games. Like the new Super Mario Brothers game series was a great series of games. I picked up a couple of them, but I didn't pick up all of them because they were fairly the same, but they were fun. And I think any of them are worth picking up, maybe not all of them. And so I think that kind of ubiquitousness to a series can also nab at bad reviews. But if you're someone who's trying to step into the series for the first time, like if I'm someone who's never played a Mario game, I would easily recommend one of the new Super Mario Brothers games because they play like the classic Mario games, but have the updated graphics. And I think that's a good place to start from. Same with like Sonic Mania, which is a retro upgrade remake. Like I would recommend that as a first Sonic game for most people because essentially it carries the core of the original games but has updated music and updated graphics a little bit and stuff like that, some gameplay elements, and like it would just make sense to me to start there.
Yeah, and these same sort of like collectivist opinions can also lift or squash entire game systems. The entire idea of like, don't buy this system, it's terrible, becomes a self fulfilling prophecy on so many levels and so many things. And we see what happens to like a lot of systems with that, like the Dreamcast, which we now have a gamer collective opinion of, oh, it died before its time. It was very underrated. It was very this and that. I remember when it came out and everybody was so burned by the Saturn and all of that going on. And everyone was waiting and seeing about the PlayStation 2. And everyone was just like, well, I'm just going to, pirate it anyway. There's a lot of factors that led to the Dreamcast's demise. But at the time, it didn't have a strong collective opinion.
No, yeah, the reviews were pretty poor for it, and that's why I didn't buy it. I played it at a friend's house and ended up moving on to the PS2, but I regret it now because it had some quality games that I didn't play till many years later because they were re-released.
Mm-hmm. And still in all, I mean, even the Sega Saturn has started getting a well after the fact, like, well, it did have some really cool games and a lot of games that haven't been like ported or converted elsewhere, and that's some neat stuff. Cool. It's all well and good to 20 years later go like, well, I guess it wasn't so bad now that it's all dead and gone. Don't speak ill of the dead. But I mean, even the fact that so many people bashed the Wii U, and again, a system that has flaws, has a lot of strengths. There's a reason several of its games are being ported to the Switch, and people are being like, oh, they're just going to send over all the Wii U stuff. Well, no one bought the Wii U, so yeah, here you go. Enjoy it. I have a
Well,
Wii U, and I enjoy the games for it, so now I'm glad everyone else is getting to see it. But we're all like, well, it's not worth it. It's terrible. So yes, people are going to pull support, so here we are.
sure, and I think also with something like the Wii U is that game reviewers and game players alike were expecting something like the Switch and got the Wii U, which wasn't bad, but it wasn't what was expected or what was kind of demoed. And I think, and there were so many articles written on the Wii U in the beginning. And so, like, game journalism can really affect the market. So Nintendo doesn't really struggle to sell handhelds. Every 3DS and DS and 2DS is sold really well, and the games sell really well because they're very accessible for young children. They're durable systems. It's a great way to get a gamer started. And so they've always had that backbone. But now that the Switch has kind of merged that, I think they're really hitting their stride that way. But again, there were tons of naysayers when the Switch was first announced, and why I didn't buy it on release and then struggled for 2 months to look everywhere to find one and finally get one is because the early reviews were like, nah, I mean, we know what happened with the Wii U. This could be the same. A lot
Right.
of speculative journalism that could kill the mojo of something. And that's effectively what killed the mojo of the Sega Dreamcast is like, well, the Saturn was terrible, so don't buy this system. Meanwhile, I still say Sonic Adventure is one of the best 3D Sonic games that sort of holds up. But it was so impressive for the time. It seems empty now because it's these huge areas that aren't very populated. But at the time, it was like, oh my God, Sonic in a 3D world like Mario 64? This is amazing. But it didn't really see the light of day until Sega went into software development. And it's because a lot of the time, people follow the industry. I think also now, back then, keep in mind with the Dreamcast, there was no independent reviewing as much. I think blogs were probably, Yeah, the blogs probably existed because they've existed for a long time, but YouTube wasn't really a thing yet, and like if it was, it wasn't super strong yet. Whereas now you can get gaming opinions and gaming news from so many sources beyond just the industry standards.
Right. No, absolutely you can. It's also worth looking at what the culture was at the time and yeah, what develops, what falls apart, or I mean, a system that is still currently being produced technically where a lot of opinion kind of matters is the PS Vita,
Yeah.
which was a system that like there's the thing of okay, it's in direct competition to the 3DS. Good luck with that. Early reviews being like, what exactly is this? There's too many like confusing features going on with it. And then Sony itself being like, it's a legacy system. But still there is a market for new games being released for it. It is still supported on PS Plus. It still has all these other things going on about it. But I sometimes wonder about people's public collectivist opinions about the Vita. I have a Vita, and I actually really like it. I enjoy the strange weeby RPGs that come out for it. I enjoy being able to play a lot of stuff on the go. It's a great way for Sarah to try out a lot of games because she will, if you make any game portable, she'll try it. She can just be like, I mean, I guess I'll play it if it's at home, but if I can like get it on the Switch or the 3DS or the Vita, I'm done. Like, if I could have a mint in box Super Nintendo copy of Chrono Trigger, she might play it. We have it for DS. She's gonna play it. So I enjoy having the Vita for that as well, and that's not necessarily a thing you can showcase in a review per se, but I know that that is an important selling point in my home.
Yeah, I think that at the end of the day, when discussing reviewers and why it's important to talk about is, you have to have your own opinion. I think getting a second opinion from a doctor and the like, I think that seeking out multiple reviews on a game that you really want will better color possibly if you'll enjoy it or not.
Yeah, find the good reviews and the bad.
Like for movies and for music, I have channels that I go to, Movie Bob and The Needle Drop, respectively. And just the same with gaming, I also have those, Pro Jared and PBG and Gerard and the like.
The normal Boots crowd.
Yeah, but I think that at the end of the day, I will look at multiple sources for game reviews just to get a better idea of how I really feel about it. But at the end of the day, the opinions I trust the most are my peers, and I think I can say that for most gamers, with the exception of a few isolated gamers, for the most part, the community will drive the strongest opinions. And I'm lucky enough with Geoff to be a part of a Facebook community that really, there's game enthusiasts, game developers, and all sorts of folks in that group who are very open about the games they play and won't openly really bash anything. They'll say it wasn't for them, and we all are honest about our experiences, but for the most part we'll ask questions like, is this game good? And no one will go, nope, that sucks, you should ignore it. They'll say, well, I liked this and I didn't like this. Like, it's very diplomatic, and I love that because I think that's the best way to really hone in and focus an opinion on a game before you buy it, or not necessarily opinion, but like a gauge, is to trust your peers that know how to discuss and engage in dialogue about gaming.
Because there are very few games that are truly objectively bad. Those exist, but not as many as you would believe. And developing a common language or a common reaction of, well, this is what I liked, this is what I didn't like, this would suit some people, this doesn't suit some people, is, while greater nuance and doesn't lead to as many like big, maybe not even necessarily hilarious opinions, it does lead to a more honest discussion about games and probably an avenue to find your new favorite one way or another. And so I'm also very happy to be a part of that community as well.
As always, guys, thanks for listening, guys, gals, and non-binary pals, to steal from Thomas Sanders, the YouTuber. But seriously, thank you for listening. As always, we love interacting with you. Please call us on our crap. A regular listener of ours last week called us out on the fact that we skipped God of War Ascension when talking about God of War in detail, as apparently many reviewers have forgotten that game exists, because
You take the numbers off, and we all lose our minds.
yeah, we don't know how to do it. So thank you for pointing that out. We always love interacting with you guys about what we do. Tell us what games that you were surprised by. Maybe the review was bad and you really liked it, or the review was good and you didn't really like it. I would love to hear some more examples, because I know they're out there. And we all engage with those reviews very differently. So it would be cool to hear your opinions on that.
Let us know where your opinions buck the popular trends, whether good, bad, indifferent. Well, not indifferent, but you know what I mean. Let's keep the conversation going, everybody. We're on Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram. We don't post much on Instagram, but we're there.
We are. Of course, always please listen to our brothers in arms at Certain POV, the Certain POV News and Reviews podcast, the Scruffy Nerf Herders podcast, and Another Pass with Case Aiken. In fact, the most recent episode of Another Pass features our good friend Geoff, who, I'm talking to, that guy, was on it again. And
I have opinions.
Yes, you do. And they talk about I
Glory
forget
days.
Glory
Days.
Days.
Right. No, that was a very personal project for Case and myself, for me and Case, because it's not a very good movie. It's one we both subjected ourselves to. We had it was it required a lot more work than the usual Another Pass fare, but I think it was a very rewarding episode for the both of us. I don't think a lot of people saw Glory Days, so it's an interesting. I'm kind of proud of that episode.
Excellent. Well, definitely go check that out. Of course, interact with us via the social medias, or feel free to write us an email. We love hearing from you all.
We really do.
Please like and subscribe. Rate us on any podcast source that you use. Also, if you don't really listen to podcasts, but you're a friend and want to support us and happen to listen this far on this episode, just subscribe and don't listen. That's fine too. It's a numbers game. I'm all about shameless promotion at this point. So thank you for listening, though, if you do listen, and everything you do on the internet to promote us helps. So we really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, we just got done saying, like, numbers are meaningless. Some numbers are meaningless.
Yes.
Review numbers are meaningless. Metrics are kind of amazing. Yes, we'll do that. But thank you for listening. Thank you for interacting with us. Thank you for being part of this wonderful culture. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I'm Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
And happy gaming.